Margaret Sullivan. The moment I said my mother's name, the Admiral's face went pale. He stopped breathing for a second. His hand, still extended from our handshake, slowly dropped to his side. His eyes became glassy, and I watched a decorated 4-star officer look suddenly less like a powerful man, and more like someone who had just been pulled into a painful memory. "Your mother," he whispered. "Yes, sir." His eyes moved to my wrist, then back to my face. "What is your name?" "Wren Sullivan." He took one step backward. I had been assigned to pick him up at the airport, not uncover a secret that had apparently survived for almost 30 years. And yet, standing beneath the fluorescent lights of the terminal, I knew something had changed the instant I saw that tattoo. It was an old-fashioned compass on his wrist, its needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother had the exact same tattoo, same design, same spot. I had seen it countless times while growing up. I remembered tracing the faded ink with my finger when I was a little girl, asking Mom what it meant. She had always smiled sadly and said, "It reminds me that some promises are worth keeping even when keeping them hurts." She never explained more. Now the man standing in front of me wore the same symbol. "Sir," I said carefully, "are you all right?" He swallowed. "Does your mother still live in Virginia?" The question hit me harder than his reaction. "How do you know my mother?" He looked away. For several seconds, the noise of the airport seemed to disappear around us. Travelers rolled suitcases across the polished floor while announcements echoed overhead. But I heard only my own heartbeat. "I asked you a question, Admiral." He looked at me. "I knew your mother a long time ago." "How long?" He hesitated. "Before you were born." My stomach tightened. I had spent most of my life believing my father had simply walked away. Mom never spoke badly about him. She only said he had chosen a different life. As a child, I accepted that. As I got older, I stopped asking. But now a 4-star admiral was looking at me as though my existence was something he had never expected to see. I forced myself back into military professionalism. "I was assigned to get you to your hotel, sir." "Yes." His voice sounded distant. He picked up his briefcase, but before we walked away, he looked at me again. "Wren, does your mother know you work with the Navy?" "She does." "Does she know you were assigned to pick me up?" "No, I didn't know who the passenger was until this morning." He nodded slowly. Then he said something that made the hair rise on my arms. Maybe that was for the best. We walked through the airport together. I kept my questions to myself until we reached the parking garage. The moment we got into the government vehicle, I closed the door and looked at him. "Who are you to my mother?" He stared through the windshield. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. The paper had yellowed. There was one name written across the front. Margaret Sullivan. My breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "I've carried it for 29 years. "Why?" "Because I thought I was never going to get the chance to return it." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "What's inside?" "A letter. From my mother." He nodded. "Then why didn't you give it to her?" His jaw tightened. "Because I never received it." I stared at him. That doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me either, not for a very long time. He turned toward me. "Wren, your mother and I loved each other." The words landed with a strange weight. I had never imagined that the man my mother loved could be standing beside me in a Navy parking garage wearing 4 stars on his shoulders. I looked at the tattoo again, the compass. His fingers covered it instinctively. She gave me the idea. Why? Because we were both young enough to believe we could keep a promise forever. His voice cracked slightly. "What promise?" He looked down at the envelope. "That no matter where the Navy sent us, we'd find our way back to each other." I didn't know what to say. Then I remembered something from my childhood. My mother sitting alone at the kitchen table late one night, holding her wrist beneath the lamp. She had whispered he was supposed to come back. At the time, I thought she meant my father. Now I wasn't so sure. The Admiral seemed to read the realization on my face. "Ren," he said quietly, "what has your mother told you about your father?" "Not much." "What did she say that he left?" His eyes closed. "And you believed her I was a child?" He nodded. "I know." There was something in the way he said those words that made me angry. You know he opened his eyes. I know because I believed the same thing about her. The silence between us felt enormous. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. For the first time I wondered whether the story my mother had protected me from was not a story about abandonment at all. Maybe it was a story about betrayal. Maybe someone had lied. And if someone had lied, I needed to know why. The Admiral started the engine. But before he pulled out of the parking space, he looked at me one last time. "Don't call your mother yet." "Why?" "Because if I'm right, she has spent almost 30 years believing something that isn't true." He paused. "And Ren, if she knows that you're standing here with me, she may finally tell you everything." I looked down at the envelope again. My mother's name was written across it in handwriting I had never seen before. That envelope was about to change everything I believed about my family. I didn't open the envelope that night. I carried it back to my apartment and placed it on the kitchen counter where I stared at it for nearly an hour. My mother's name was still there in faded ink. Margaret Sullivan. The same woman who had raised me alone. The same woman who had always avoided questions about my father. And now I knew the man standing beside me at the airport believed he had once loved her. I couldn't stop thinking about what the Admiral had said. "Your mother and I loved each other." There was no hesitation in his voice when he said it. No attempt to impress me, no pride, only regret. The next morning I drove to my mother's house. She lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Norfolk in a modest brick ranch she had owned for years. Her front porch had 2 rocking chairs, although she rarely used them. She preferred sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. When I walked through the door, she looked up. "You're early. I need to ask you something." She immediately put down her coffee. "Is something wrong?" I placed the envelope on the table. Her face changed, not dramatically, just enough. Her fingers stopped moving. She stared at her own name. "Where did you get that?" "The Admiral gave it to me." She looked at me. "Which Admiral Thomas Callahan?" The color drained from her face. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You met Thomas at the airport. You were assigned to pick him up." "Yes." She closed her eyes. I had never seen my mother look frightened before, not when I enlisted, not when I deployed, not even when she had undergone surgery years earlier, but now her hands were trembling. "Mom," I said softly, "who is Thomas Callahan?" She didn't answer. "Who is he to you? Still nothing." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He showed me his wrist. Her eyes lifted. "The tattoo." She looked away. "An old-fashioned compass," I continued, the needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother's lips began to tremble. "He has the same tattoo you have." She pressed her hand over her mouth. I waited. Finally she whispered, "He was supposed to come back." That sentence stopped me cold. I remembered hearing those exact words when I was a little girl. He was supposed to come back. I had always assumed she meant my father. Now I knew better. Was Thomas Callahan my father? She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the answer before she said it. Yes. The room seemed to tilt. I stood up, then sat back down. "No, I'm sorry. You told me my father left. I told you what I believed. You knew his name." "Yes." "You knew where he was. I didn't know where he was for most of your childhood. But you knew he was Thomas." She lowered her eyes. "Yes." I felt anger rising in my chest. Not because she had kept a secret, because I suddenly understood how much of my childhood had been built around that secret. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought he chose not to know you." I stared at her. "He said the same thing about you." My mother looked up sharply. "What he thought you left him." Her expression broke. "No, He said he believed you abandoned him. She shook her head. I never abandoned Thomas. Then what happened? She stood and walked to a cabinet near the dining room. For a moment she simply rested her hand on the handle. Then she opened it. Behind a stack of old cookbooks was a small wooden box. She carried it to the table. Inside were photographs, letters, military papers, and a folded piece of fabric. She picked up one photograph. It showed a younger version of my mother standing beside a man in a Navy uniform, Thomas Callahan. They were both smiling. Not the polite smile people use for photographs. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. My mother turned the photograph over. On the back in faded handwriting were 4 words, "Find your way home." She handed it to me. "We made those tattoos after Thomas received orders overseas," she said. "You both got them." "Yes. Why the Big Dipper?" She smiled sadly. "He said sailors needed stars." I almost laughed, but I couldn't. She continued, "The compass meant direction. The stars meant home. We promised that no matter what happened, we would find our way back." What happened? Her expression hardened. Someone lied to both of us. Who? She looked toward the window. Captain Richard Hayes. The name meant nothing to me, but my mother clearly remembered it. "He served with Thomas," she said. "He was ambitious. Very ambitious." "What did he do?" "He told me Thomas had moved on, that he had decided our relationship was a mistake. Then he told Thomas that I wanted nothing more to do with him. That was a lie." "Yes." My mother opened another drawer and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. "I wrote Thomas dozens of times." I looked at the envelopes. Some had been returned, others had never been opened. "You never sent them." "I sent everyone." My throat tightened. "Then why didn't he get them?" "I don't know." I looked at the letters again. "Mom, what about me?" She sat down. "I found out I was pregnant after Thomas was deployed. And you told him I tried. Did he know?" "I don't think so." Her voice broke. I waited for a response that never came. I understood then. The anger I had carried toward my father for years had been built on a story neither of us had written. My mother reached for my hand. "Wren, I never wanted you to grow up hating him." "I did hate him." "I know. I thought he didn't want me." She squeezed my fingers. "He never knew." I looked down at the letters. One envelope was dated 3 months before I was born. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. I opened it carefully. The first line read, "Thomas, if you are reading this, then someone finally let my letter reach you." I stopped breathing. Because underneath that sentence was another line, and it was written in a different hand. "Returned, do not forward." I knew then that the lie hadn't simply separated 2 people. It had taken a father from his daughter before either of us ever had the chance to meet. I read the letter 3 times before I could make sense of what I was seeing. My mother had written to Thomas from the hospital where she worked. She had told him about the pregnancy, about the baby she was carrying, and about how desperately she wanted him to come home. But beneath her words was that handwritten instruction, "Returned, do not forward." I looked at my mother. "Who wrote this? I don't know. You must have some idea." She shook her head. "I knew something was wrong, Wren. I just didn't know how wrong." I gathered the letters and took them home with me. That night I called Admiral Callahan. He answered on the second ring. "Wren, I found the letters." There was silence. "All of them, not all. Enough." He exhaled slowly. "Your mother told you." "She told me you were my father." Another silence. Then I heard his voice change. "Wren, I need you to tell me your side." "I will. Everything, I promise." The following afternoon we met at a small diner outside Norfolk. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone expected to see a 4-star admiral. That was exactly why Callahan chose it. He arrived in civilian clothes. A navy blue jacket, white shirt, no medals, no rank insignia. For the first time he looked less like an admiral and more like an older man who had spent years carrying something heavy. He sat across from me. "I loved your mother," he said. I know. She was the strongest woman I had ever met. Then why didn't you go looking for her? His eyes lowered. Because I believed she didn't want me. Because of Richard Hayes. He nodded. Hayes was my superior for a time. He was smart, well-connected, and very good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. What exactly did he tell you? Callahan looked toward the window. He told me Margaret had written to him. He said she wanted to end our relationship. Did you see the letter? No. Then why believe him? Because he showed me a copy. My anger rose. What did it say that Margaret had met someone else? That she wanted a normal life? That she didn't want a Navy officer coming back into her life? That wasn't her. I know that now. You should have known then. He didn't defend himself. You're right. That answer surprised me. He continued. I was young, I was angry, and I was being deployed again. Hayes told me she had already made her choice. So you walked away? Yes. And never checked. His eyes filled. I wrote her once. Once one letter. What happened, I was told it was returned. My heart sank. Who told you, Hayes? There it was again. The same man standing between them. The same name appearing on both sides of the story. I pulled out a copy of my mother's letter. This one was returned, too. Callahan stared at the handwriting. I've never seen that letter. You should have. Yes. He looked down. I should have gone to her house. I should have called. I should have asked questions. I should have done 100 things differently. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Maybe I never would be. But at least he wasn't pretending he had done everything right. What did Hayes want? Callahan hesitated. He knew I was reviewing several procurement contracts. Military contracts. Yes. Were they connected to him indirectly? He explained that several years earlier he had discovered irregularities involving a defense contractor and officers who had financial connections to the company. Hayes had been involved in the review process. Callahan suspected Hayes was protecting someone. But why destroy your relationship with my mother because I was getting too close? So he separated you from her to protect his career. That is what I believe. I stared at him. That doesn't explain why he kept lying for decades. Callahan leaned back. Because once someone builds a lie, they have to keep feeding it. That sentence stayed with me. The next morning I started digging. I wasn't investigating as a vigilante. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I was a Navy servicewoman and I knew the difference between suspicion and evidence. I began with public records, old newspaper archives, military biographies, and documents my mother had saved. Then I found something. A newspaper article from 1998. It mentioned a procurement investigation that had quietly ended after a senior officer transferred to another command. The officer's name was Richard Hayes. I kept reading. There was a photograph beside the article. Hayes stood beside Thomas Callahan at an official Navy ceremony. The caption described them as trusted colleagues. I almost laughed. Trusted colleagues. I printed the article. Then I found something else. A handwritten note inside one of my mother's old envelopes. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother had written Richard said Thomas would lose his career if I kept contacting him. I stared at that sentence. Then another note beneath it. He said Thomas had already chosen someone else. My hands began to shake. Hayes hadn't simply lied once. He had controlled the story from both sides. He had made my mother believe Thomas didn't want her. He had made Thomas believe my mother didn't want him. And while they both lived with the consequences, he continued building his career. I called Callahan. I found something. What your former colleague wasn't just involved in the letters. What did you find Mom wrote that he threatened your career? There was silence. Then Callahan said quietly, I remember that conversation. My heart stopped. What conversation? Hayes warned me that if Margaret kept contacting me, my career could become complicated. You remember? I remember. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't certain. I closed my eyes. Admiral, we need to find out what really happened. Yes. And if Hayes did this deliberately, Callahan interrupted gently, "Ren, what are you planning?" I looked at the old photograph on my desk. "I don't want revenge." I paused. "I want the truth." And for the first time I understood that those two things were not the same. I spent the next several days reminding myself of one thing: I was not going to become obsessed with revenge. That would have been easy. After discovering that one man might have stolen decades from my mother, my father and me, part of me wanted to see Richard Hayes lose everything. His reputation, his friends, his comfortable retirement. Every bit of respect he had earned while my mother lived with the consequences of his lies. But anger is dangerous when you let it make decisions for you. I had learned that in the Navy. You don't act because you're angry. You gather facts. You document what happened, then you let the truth speak for itself. So I kept digging. Admiral Callahan helped where he could, but he was careful. He didn't want to use his rank to pressure anyone. If this was going to be resolved, it had to be based on evidence. Then we found someone who could help. Richard Hayes had been married for decades. His wife was named Evelyn. According to public records, they still lived in the same Virginia town where they had raised their children. I wasn't sure what she knew. I wasn't even sure she would speak to us. But when Callahan called her, she agreed to meet. Not at her house, not at a restaurant. She asked us to meet at a small church fellowship hall on a Tuesday afternoon. When Evelyn walked in, she looked like a woman who had spent years carrying a secret she didn't want anymore. She was in her late 60s with silver hair and tired eyes. She looked at Callahan. Then at me. "You're Margaret's daughter?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I thought you might come one day." My heart tightened. "You knew about me. I knew there was a child. Did you know I was his daughter?" She looked at Callahan. "I suspected." Callahan remained silent. I placed copies of the letters on the table. "I need to know what Richard did." Evelyn sat down. For several moments she simply stared at the papers. Then she said Richard was afraid of Thomas. Why? Because Thomas was getting close to something Richard didn't want anyone to find. The contracts. She nodded. "I don't know all the details. Richard never told me everything, but I knew there was an investigation." "Did he interfere with my mother's letters?" Evelyn looked down. "Yes." My chest tightened. "How do you know?" "Because I saw him do it." Callahan leaned forward. "What did you see?" Evelyn took a slow breath. He had a stack of envelopes. Some were addressed to Thomas. Some were addressed to Margaret. I felt my hands go cold. What did he do with them? He opened them. Why, he said he was protecting Thomas. I almost laughed. Protecting him. That was the word he used. Evelyn looked at me. "He said Margaret was emotional and that Thomas needed to focus on his career." I shook my head. That wasn't his decision to make. "No, did you ever confront him?" "Not then." Why, she looked away. Because I was afraid too. That answer stayed with me. Fear had been everywhere in this story. My mother had been afraid of destroying Thomas's career. Thomas had been afraid of being unwanted. Evelyn had been afraid of her husband, and Richard Hayes had been afraid of losing his career. One man's fear had multiplied until it became an entire family's tragedy. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small key. "There is something I kept." She placed it on the table. "What is it, a box?" She looked at Callahan. "Richard doesn't know I have it." The box was in her car. Inside were copies of old correspondence notes and one letter Richard had written. I unfolded it carefully. The letter wasn't addressed to my mother. It was addressed to another Navy officer. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard had written that Callahan needed to be kept away from personal distractions while the procurement investigation was underway. Then came a sentence that made my stomach turn. Margaret Sullivan must not be allowed to contact him directly. I looked at Callahan. His face had gone completely still. "You were right," I whispered. He didn't answer. Evelyn began to cry. I should have stopped him. I looked at her. "You can't change what happened, I know. But you can tell the truth now." She nodded. "I want to." That was when I realized something. The truth wasn't going to come from revenge. It was going to come from people finally becoming brave enough to say what they had seen. Later that evening, Callahan and I sat in his car outside the fellowship hall. He held the copy of Richard's letter. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Do what, keep digging." I turned toward him. "My mother waited almost 30 years. I know, I spent most of my life thinking my father didn't want me." He looked down. "I know, and now you're telling me I can just walk away." "No," he paused. "I'm telling you that you don't have to carry this alone." For some reason, those words affected me more than anything else he had said. I had spent my entire life thinking I had to be strong because there was no one else. Now this man, the father I had never known, was offering to stand beside me. Not as an admiral, not as a stranger, as my father. But I wasn't ready to call him that. Not yet. "We still need to talk to Hayes," I said. Callahan nodded. "I'll go with you." "No." He looked surprised. "I need to do this myself." "Wren, I don't want him hiding behind your rank." Callahan understood. The next afternoon I drove to Richard Hayes's house. He opened the door himself. He was older than I expected. White hair, thin frame, a cane in one hand. For a moment I felt something unexpected. Not hatred, sadness. Because this was the man who had changed 3 lives with a handful of lies. He looked at me. "You're Wren." "Yes." His face changed. "Does Thomas know you're here?" "He does now." Hayes lowered his eyes. I placed the copies of the letters on the table between us. "You told my mother he abandoned her." Silence. "You told him she abandoned him." Nothing. "You intercepted their letters." His hand tightened around the cane. Finally he whispered, "I was afraid." I stared at him. Of what, losing everything? I took a breath. "You didn't just risk losing your career." I pointed to the letters. "You stole a family." Hayes looked at the papers, and for the first time, the man who had controlled everyone else's story had nothing left to say. Richard Hayes kept staring at the letters on his dining room table. For almost a minute he said nothing. I stood across from him waiting. Finally, he lowered himself into a chair. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. I felt something inside me tighten. "Almost 30 years is a long way to go." He nodded. "I know. Then tell me exactly what happened." He rubbed his hands together. "I was afraid Thomas was going to expose the procurement problems. There were people above me involved. If he kept digging, my career was finished. And my mother, she became leverage." The word made my stomach turn. "You used her." "Yes, why? Because I knew he loved her." Hayes looked down. I thought if I convinced him she had rejected him, he would stop looking backward and focus on his career. "And you told my mother the same thing about him?" "Yes. Did you know she was pregnant?" His face changed. "No, I studied him. You didn't know." No, for some reason that answer hurt more than I expected. Because it meant the tragedy had been even more ordinary than I imagined. There hadn't been some elaborate plan to steal a child. There had been fear, selfishness, lies, and people making decisions they had no right to make. What happened to the letters? I intercepted some, most, and the rest destroyed. My jaw tightened. "You destroyed letters between 2 people who loved each other." "Yes." Why? He looked at me. Because by then I was trying to protect the lie. There it was. The sentence I had been waiting for. Once a lie becomes your shield, you start defending it even after you forget why you built it. I stood. "I don't want your excuses, I know. I want the truth documented." He nodded. "I'll give you everything I have." "You'll also tell my mother." His eyes filled with regret. "I will." I left his house without shaking his hand. I wasn't ready for that. Outside, I called Callahan. He confessed. There was a long silence. "Are you all right?" "No," he didn't try to make me feel better. That mattered. "I'll meet you at your mother's." When I arrived, Callahan was already there. He stood on my mother's porch looking strangely nervous. For the first time I realized that this decorated admiral, this man who had commanded thousands of sailors, was terrified of one woman. My mother opened the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither moved. Then my mother said quietly, "Thomas." He swallowed. "Margaret." I stepped aside. "I'll be inside." My mother reached for my arm. "No, stay." So I stayed. Callahan looked at her. "I thought you left me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought you didn't want me." "I never stopped loving you." She looked down. I waited. "I know." "No, Thomas, you don't know." Her voice trembled. "I waited every night. I thought maybe there would be a phone call, a letter, anything. I wrote. I never received them. I know that now." She looked at him. "Why didn't you come?" He took a breath. "Because I believed you didn't want me." My mother's face crumpled. "I was 26. So was I. We were young. Yes. And scared. Yes." She laughed through her tears. "We let other people decide our lives." Callahan nodded. "I should have fought harder." "You should have." He didn't argue. "I should have come looking for you." "Yes, I should have found you. Yes, and I should have known there was a child." My mother looked at me. "You didn't know? I would have come." "I believe you." That was the first moment I saw something change between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something smaller. The possibility of forgiveness. Callahan turned toward me. "Ren, I'm sorry." I crossed my arms. "You didn't know I existed." "No, but once you knew I wanted to find you, you could have." "Yes." I expected anger. Instead, I felt tears in my eyes. I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me. His face broke. "There was never anything wrong with you. I thought my father didn't want me." He shook his head. "I would have wanted every minute." I looked away. For years I had imagined meeting my father. I had imagined anger, accusations, maybe even walking away. I had never imagined standing in my mother's kitchen with tears running down my face while a 4-star Admiral apologized for a childhood he hadn't known he had taken from me. He didn't ask me to call him Dad. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "If you ever want to know me, I'll be here." That was enough. Over the next few weeks, the evidence was formally documented and turned over to the appropriate authorities and Navy channels for review. Richard Hayes could no longer hide behind his retirement or his reputation. But something surprised me. Seeing consequences finally reach him didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. My mother and Callahan began talking again. Slowly, carefully. They didn't pretend 30 years had disappeared. They didn't suddenly become young again. They simply started having coffee together. Sometimes they argued, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they sat in silence. One evening I noticed them sitting on the porch. My mother reached for Callahan's hand, his sleeve pulled back slightly. I saw the tattoo, the old compass, the needle pointing toward the Big Dipper. My mother noticed it too. She smiled. I never changed mine. Callahan rolled back his own sleeve. Neither did I. I looked at their wrists. 2 identical tattoos, 2 people who had spent decades believing they had lost each other. And suddenly I understood something. The tattoo had never been a promise that life would be easy. It was a reminder that people can lose their way. What matters is whether they have the courage to find their way back. I had spent weeks thinking about revenge, but standing there watching my mother and the father I had just discovered, I realized something I hadn't expected. The best ending wasn't watching Richard Hayes suffer. It was watching his lies finally lose their power. He had taken years from us, but he couldn't take the years we still had left. I looked at Callahan. He smiled. "Dinner next Sunday?" Sunday, I hesitated. Then I smiled back. Okay. It was only one word. But for me, it was the beginning of something I had never thought I'd have. A father. For a long time I thought justice would feel different. I thought there would be a moment when Richard Hayes finally faced what he had done, and I would feel some great weight lift from my chest. But when the truth was documented and his actions were finally brought into the proper channels for review, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day at work. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying the same unanswered question for most of your life. Why didn't my father want me? Why did my mother wait? Why did two people who loved each other spend decades believing they had been rejected? And why had I needed to discover a tattoo at an airport to finally learn the truth? There were no easy answers. Richard Hayes eventually faced the consequences of what he had done. His reputation could no longer protect him from the facts. People who had once trusted him had to confront what he had hidden. But I never celebrated it. That surprised me. For weeks I had imagined standing over him and finally saying, "You deserve this." Instead, when I heard that his actions were being formally reviewed, I simply closed my eyes. I thought about my mother. I thought about the little girl I had been. And I thought about the man I had spent years believing didn't want me. That was when I realized something important. Justice wasn't about making Hayes feel the pain he had caused. Justice was about making sure the truth could no longer be buried. A few months passed. My mother's relationship with Thomas changed slowly. They didn't pretend they could erase 30 years. They couldn't. There were birthdays missed, holidays spent apart, family photographs that would never exist, childhood memories Thomas could never recover. There were things I couldn't tell him because I didn't remember them. There were stories my mother had stopped telling because they hurt too much. But they began building something new. Not the life they had lost. A different life. One afternoon I found the two of them sitting on my mother's porch. Thomas was holding 2 cups of coffee. My mother was reading the newspaper. "You're early," she said when she saw me. "I came to check on you." Thomas smiled. "You always check on people. Occupational hazard." He laughed. I sat beside them. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Thomas asked, "Do you remember the first time you saw the tattoo at the airport?" "Yes." "I remember thinking you looked like you had seen a ghost." He smiled faintly. I thought I had. I looked at his wrist. "Do you ever regret getting it?" He shook his head. "Never. Even after everything. Especially after everything." My mother reached for his hand. I watched their fingers slowly intertwine. The compass tattoo was visible beneath his sleeve. The needle pointed toward the Big Dipper. My mother noticed me looking at it. "You know what it means now," I nodded. "Finding your way home." She smiled. "That's what we called it." Thomas looked at her. And I meant it. I looked down at my own hands. For most of my life, I had thought family was something you were either given or denied. I had believed mine was broken before I was old enough to understand what broken meant. But now I understood something different. Families can be damaged. People can make terrible mistakes. Years can disappear. And still sometimes people can choose what to do with the time they have left. One Sunday, Thomas invited me to his home for dinner. I almost said no, not because I didn't want to go, because I was nervous. I had spent my entire adult life being independent. Now I was learning how to be someone's daughter. That was harder than I expected. We sat around his dining room table. He had cooked too much food. I laughed when I saw it. "Did you make enough for the entire squadron?" He smiled. "Your mother told me you like leftovers." "She did." "She's been giving me instructions." I laughed. It felt strangely normal. After dinner, Thomas brought out an old photograph. It was the same photograph my mother had shown me. He was young. She was young. Both of them smiling. On the back were the words, "Find your way home." He handed it to me. "I want you to have this." I looked at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I turned the photograph over again. There was something peaceful about holding it now. The picture no longer represented a life that had been stolen from me. It represented a truth that had finally found its way back. I put the photograph in my wallet. "Thank you." He nodded. Then he said something I will never forget. "I can't give you back the years I missed." I looked at him. "But I can make sure I don't miss the ones ahead." That was when I finally allowed myself to say the word. Dad. His eyes filled with tears. He looked down for a moment, trying to compose himself. Then he smiled. "Yeah, nothing." He laughed softly, and somehow that was enough. My mother and Thomas never tried to recreate their youth. They simply chose to stop letting the past decide the future. As for me, I carried one lesson forward. I used to think revenge meant making someone feel the pain they had caused. I was wrong. Sometimes the strongest form of justice is refusing to let another person's lie determine who you become. The truth doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it comes after years of silence. Sometimes it arrives in a faded letter. Sometimes it appears on the wrist of a stranger at an airport. But when it finally comes, you have a choice. You can use it to destroy, or you can use it to heal. I chose healing. My mother chose forgiveness without forgetting. Thomas chose to make up for lost time. And even though none of us could change what happened, we could decide what happened next. That old compass tattoo taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. A compass doesn't promise that you will never get lost. It simply reminds you that you can always choose a direction. And sometimes, after years of wandering the direction you need, most is home. If this story touched something in your own life, take a moment to think about the people you may have misunderstood, the words you may have left unsaid, or the relationships that might still be worth repairing. And if you believe that truth, forgiveness, and second chances still matter, share this story with someone who may need that reminder. Subscribe for more stories about courage, family justice, and the unexpected ways life gives us a second chance. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. Sometimes it's finding your way home.